It's brutal to watch.
Speedster.
It doesn't matter.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to week 7 of the Avenger League fantasy football season. I'm recording early in the morning, fresh out of bed, one coffee, one poop, and we're going. So a little bit groggy this morning, but you know, whatever. We grind to get the videos out for you and all the loyal listeners out there. Start out with a quick recap of last week. You know, a couple interesting matchups. The Stevensons being by far the most interesting. And ended up, you know, getting Trevor $10 for smallest margin of defeat. A match that went right into Monday night with Keenan Allen versus Dak Prescott. Just exhilarating and keeping Trevor in last place after taking a pretty heartbreaking loss to his wife Ashley, 123 to 121. We had Wade putting up by far his worst game of the season, losing 109 to 66 to myself. Charlie having a rough week, going down 112 to 60. Andrew kind of continuing his sneaky rise, taking down John 111 to 80. And Raleigh continuing his little win streak here against Cameron, 115 to 97. So that kind of rounds out the standings here with a very interesting 5-way tie for first at 4-2. And of course, head-to-head matchups always cause them a little turd in the punch bowl. So Raleigh jumps into first place at 4-2. Andrew jumps into second place, also at 4-2. Cameron here gets knocked down to third place. Myself in fourth. Wade now drops all the way to fifth, taking a couple losses to the other 4-2 teams. So still, once again, 5-way tie record-wise, and that being how it shakes out after the tiebreakers. And then you have the first of the non-4-2s in Tim in sixth place, Charlie in seventh at 2-4, Ashley in eighth at 2-4, John in ninth at 2-4, and finally Trevor in last place at 1-5. So still insanely close records throughout the season. Obviously with the 16 playoff, there's still plenty of opportunities for people to get on a little hot streak here and sneak into that sixth spot. But Trevor, dude, you gotta turn it around. Let's look at some waiver wire pickups this week. There was nothing crazy. There was no big splash names on there. Obviously we had the injuries to the Rams running backs, so Zach Evans was kind of the big name this week. John ended up snagging him to replace Kyron Williams. Trevor once again makes a quarterback change, picking up Jared Goff, but I believe he's starting Tua this week. We'll see where that ends up towards the end of the week and see if that stays true. Jordan Mason was another kind of big name this week, assuming CMC misses a game. We don't really know. The 49ers haven't really said. Apparently he's getting an MRI, but we don't have the results of it. I went ahead and snagged Kareem Hunt, who had a touchdown last week and maybe is ready to take over that backfield. Who knows? But I went ahead and picked him up, stashed him just in case. Keontae Ingram kind of looks like he's taking over the main role for James Conner, and Tim went ahead and snagged him as well. The rest of this is mostly defenses and kickers. There were a couple, Myles Gaskin for the Rams, just as a shot in the dark. Shout out Myles Gaskin, forgot about him. And then Ashley went ahead and picked up Brock Purdy as well. Haven't looked at the games yet to see if she's got, I guess, Dak Prescott on a bye and Deshaun Watson's dead. So Brock Purdy, probably a good pickup there. We talked about the wheel last week. Trevor ended up winning with the smallest margin of defeat. So let's go ahead and move over to this week's wheel and see what we got working. Longest win streak. So a little bit of explanation on how this one will actually work. So right now, let's look at some eligible teams. Who's got the longest? So Raleigh's got a 3-game win streak. Andrew's got a 2-game win streak. Tim is on a 2-game win streak. And Ashley is on a 1-game win. Well, there's a couple teams on a 1-game win streak. I think, yeah, I don't think any of these teams kind of in the running play each other. So basically, the way this is going to work is its longest win streak at the end of the week. So Raleigh now has a 3-game win streak. Let's say he loses and Andrew on a 2-game win streak wins. It'll go to him. Now let's say Andrew, who's on a 2-game win streak, and Tim, who is also on a 2-game win streak, both win. Great. We're not crowning a winner this week. We go till one of them loses, basically. If they both lose, then it goes down to the ones, and so on and so on. So basically, and Raleigh, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I assume you're going to watch this early so you can get the word out there. Basically, if there's a tie for win streak at the end of this week, we just roll it over to next week until one of those teams loses. So a little bit of a complicated one, and if Raleigh just wins, then it's over. He gets to keep his $10. If he doesn't, it could get really interesting and start rolling over to next week, and could be a real interesting thing to track going forward. So, all that recap work done. Let's jump into this week. This week is what a lot of people on Reddit and the NFL are calling bye-mageddon. So we have, I think, 6 teams on a bye this week. The Panthers, whatever. The Bengals, big bye week. Cowboys, Texans, Jets, and Titans. So a couple of big names. Thielen, obviously Chase, Higgins, Burrow, McPherson, all on a bye from the Bengals. Dak, CD, Pollard, the defense, all from the Cowboys. Nico, CJ Stroud from the Texans. Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall from the Jets and their defense. And obviously King Henry, Tajay Spears, even D-Hop if you want to count that a little bit. All on a bye this week. So a lot of fill-in spots, a lot of waiver wire pickups, and probably going to lead to a lot of hilarious starters in some lineups this week. So getting into the games. And once again, we'll start with first place, which, as has been the case for the last couple years, means we get to start with Raleigh. Funny enough, he's also playing Wade, who we've got to start with every week this year. So just kind of glancing at this, I'm not seeing a huge cut of bye players. Okay. The biggest name here being missing on a bye week is, funny enough, the Cowboys defense from Raleigh's team, who, really hasn't kind of done what they've been doing all year the last couple of weeks. 4 points last week against the Chargers and putting up a negative against the 49ers. So maybe good that they get a little break. But of course, Raleigh, being the defensive guru that he is, went ahead and snagged the Browns defense. And we actually have a battle of 2 of the best defenses in the league, with Browns versus 49ers. 49ers getting the Vikings and the Browns getting the now Gardner Minshew led Colts. Probably giving the advantage to the Browns there, but who knows? It's defenses, anything can happen. As far as real players, the quarterback matchup here is actually pretty interesting. Jalen Hurts versus Lamar Jackson. A lot of rushing upside from each of them. QB1s the last couple years. Lamar Jackson, 3 or 4 years ago, and Jalen Hurts last year. Both potential to put up massive rushing numbers, both potential to get rushing touchdowns. Jalen Hurts being a little more consistent over the last few years, and he could say decently vulnerable. Miami defense with a weak secondary that's still just waiting on the return of Jalen Ramsey. And obviously Jalen Hurts being by far the most consistent fantasy quarterback you can find, just because he adds such a huge rushing threat. And you would think the same of Lamar Jackson, but he has been kind of up and down this year, has a bunch of games over 20 points, 22, 28, 28. And he's got some stinkers the last couple of weeks. 9 points against the Steelers, which, divisional game. They always kind of work that. And then a decent defense last week in the Titans. But this week he gets the Lions, who are a little bit vulnerable in the secondary, but do have one of the top rushing defenses in the league, and I think will do better than most at keeping him contained in the pocket. Leaving him to kind of attack downfield, which he can do, but we'll see how that goes. I do trust Jalen Hurts a little bit more against Miami in this matchup, and what should be a shootout on Sunday Night Football. And then on the other side, talking about that matchup again, you still have Raheem Mostert, and this is a battle of the what I would peg as one of the biggest trades in the season, Bijan to Eckler. So Raleigh now adding Eckler to the lineup against Kansas City, where the Chargers do usually perform pretty well against Kansas City. They don't usually win, but they usually put up numbers against the Chiefs. It's always a fun matchup. It's one of both of those weeks that the Chargers and the Chiefs play are by far two of my favorite weeks of the year. Love those games. They're always a fucking blast. So I do expect Eckler to put up some numbers there. And then Bijan, Bijan's just been incredible. Even when last week, he only had 80 yards total. Catches a ton through the air, keeps his floor up. So pretty weak game last week, and he still put up 10.5 points. So that'll be a very interesting matchup to keep an eye on. And then we have two very capable wide receiver cores here with Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, Devontae Smith against Stephon Diggs, AJ Brown, and Tyler Lockett. Obviously, Stephon Diggs and AJ Brown being the much more consistent duo. But we've seen Devontae Adams put up 30, and he gets a very weak Bears defense. If there's ever a game for him to get right, he does have a questionable tag on him. What is that? Limited? Yeah, he's probably just some maintenance. I think he's good. But we've seen him pop off before against weak secondaries. Week 3 against Pittsburgh, who also is a bad secondary, 172 yards, 2 touchdowns, 35 points. I think he was wide receiver 1 that week. Maybe not. I'm not going to take the time to go back and look. But Diggs and Brown obviously have just been, the last couple of weeks have really found their footing and have started just going crazy. Diggs has had 100 yards in each of his last 4 games, and obviously he had that 3 touchdown game against the Dolphins a few weeks ago. AJ Brown has also had 100 yards in his last 4 games, and he gets to play that Miami defense that Stephon Diggs put up 3 touchdowns against. And then on the other side, I talked about Devontae Adams playing a weak secondary. Puka Nacua, in his first week back with Cooper Kupp, still went for 71 yards and a touchdown, but last week still had 7 targets, so a decent amount of target share. Only caught 4 of those balls for 26 yards, so 4.6 points. In the meantime, Cooper Kupp was going for 150 yards and a touchdown on the other side, so a trend to really keep an eye on to see if Puka Nacua is going to have that type of value going forward this year. And then the battle of Eagles wide receivers here, Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. Who's going to get the bulk of the targets? This year it's been AJ Brown. Devontae Smith has been kind of left by the wayside. He had 1 good week against Minnesota in week 2. But once again, the Dolphins have an exposable secondary that there's room for both of them to eat here. It's just who's getting targets in prime time. And going through all that and looking at the matchups, I do love the Devontae Adams against the Bears matchup, but at the same time, I do think Raleigh still has a little bit too much firepower here. Until Raheem Mostert gets sidelined by either Achane coming back or Jeff Wilson returning off of IR, I think Raleigh's going to have a little bit of a tough team to get through. So I'm going to stick with him winning this week. Raleigh taking the win, staying in first place most likely, and annoying the fuck out of all of us. Jumping straight down the line here, we have myself against John. John is getting bye fucked pretty hard, and he also is getting injury fucked pretty hard. He has Dameon Pierce on a bye, Kyren Williams out with injury, Garrett Wilson on a bye. So he is left starting Jahmyr Gibbs, who, if there was a time for Jahmyr Gibbs to break out, it's going to be now with David Montgomery going down. I didn't talk about that for Raleigh's matchup, but David Montgomery will be missing a few weeks. And then, of course, Zach Evans filling in for Kyren Williams. Hollywood Brown filling in for Garrett Wilson. Terry McLaurin, love Terry. And Gabe Davis in his flex spot. And Sam Howell starting at quarterback. It's been a rough year for John. Anthony Richardson finally announced out for the year, so you can probably go ahead and get rid of him, but you had a good keeper for next year. John with by far the lowest points projection I've seen this year, and a lot of that has to do with Zach Evans hasn't been updated yet to a starting role. So I do see this going up a little bit, but right now projected at 79.45 points, which is borderline hilarious. Which probably means that Gabe Davis is going to have his weird 3 touchdown game. And Zach Evans is just going to slot right in and go for 2 or 3 touchdowns. And Sam Howell, we've seen him capable a few weeks ago. Who is it against? Against the Bears, of course. Put up 25 points, 2 touchdowns, had some rushing production, 290 yards. So I was looking at the wrong week. 388 yards, 2 touchdowns. So we've seen him have productive weeks against some bad defenses. He's certainly got the supporting cast to do that. And against a very bad Giants team, probably the worst roster in the NFL. Obviously, he could have a chance to do that again, and I kind of foresee him putting up 22 to 24 points, and being a very serviceable replacement. And then, like I said, Jahmyr Gibbs, if he's going to break out, this is the week to do it. I do kind of like the Howell and McLaurin stack. If you're going to have to stream a quarterback, you might as well get one where you can double up on some points, so that's nice there as well. Flip it over to my side. I talked about the Chargers and the Chiefs matchup. Herbert always plays the Chiefs well. The Chiefs, as far as fantasy scoring, secondaries have been a little bit better this year. I really don't think their matchups have been insanely great. But they're better than we think of, and we think of the Chiefs secondary and Chiefs defense overall. And in fact, they've been winning a lot with their defense with Mahomes struggling. Obviously, the big question marks here are going to be McCaffrey and Aaron Jones, and if they're even going to play. They still haven't really said what's up with Christian McCaffrey. They play on Monday night, so they really haven't had a practice session yet. Apparently, they're going to get an MRI, or he had one on Monday, but I haven't really seen any results of it. Apparently, it's not a long-term injury, but what does that mean? Does that mean 2 weeks? Does that mean he's playing this week? Does that mean he's going to be limited this week? Who the fuck knows? Luckily, if he can't go, I don't really have a great option for a running back. Deontay Foreman against the Raiders, I guess, as long as Rashawn Johnson's not back. Hell, maybe we take a shot with Kareem Hunt, see what we can do there. My bigger worry is Aaron Jones. He's still limited in practice. He's missed 5 weeks at this point. If he misses this week, it'll be his 5th week. I didn't even realize he got in on that Detroit game. Oh yeah, I do, because I started him. Yeah, I remember that now. He played for like 2 snaps, then sat out again. Obviously, if he can go, he gets the Broncos. So if he can go, it's going to be a massive week. I just don't know if he can go at this point. So hell, maybe I look at AJ Dillon, which I don't even know who I'd replace on my bench. Probably Kareem Hunt. In fact, I probably should go ahead and pick him up before I put this video out. I should probably go and take care of that. I love the wide receiver matchups this week. Cooper Kupp against a Pittsburgh secondary who is ranked 29th in fantasy right now to opposing running backs, allowing 43 points per game. Coming off of a 150-yard, 1 touchdown performance against Arizona. He had 118 yards in week 5 against the Eagles. So he's all the way back. Only 9 targets last week, which, that was probably more game script than anything. A lot of running the ball against the Cardinals. But was able to pull in 7 of those for 148 yards. And he gets a much worse secondary this week. And then Brandon Ayuk against the Vikings, whose secondary is ranked 30th against opposing wide receivers this week. And especially if Christian McCaffrey can't go, I'm counting on Ayuk to really fill in that role. Because without Debo, without McCaffrey, I think Ayuk should be absolutely fed this week against a bad Vikings secondary. And we saw Brock Purdy have his worst game of the season last week against the Browns. I expect a big bounce back from the 49ers. They're too good of a team to really get down like that and go on a bad losing streak here. So, I don't think there's a ton to talk about here. John is hoping for some miracle games for a couple of his players, which is not impossible. We've seen Hollywood Brown have some of those games. Terry McLaurin at any point can go for 150 and a touchdown. And Gabe Davis, who the fuck knows what he's gonna do. I think just consistency here. I'm gonna go with myself, but look out for John this week. You see, if he can get some pops from some of these players, it could end up being a close game. Going into the Monday night matchup between the 49ers and the Vikings. That's the other thing with the Christian McCaffrey injury that terrifies me is they play on Monday night. So if we get to Monday and he's not playing, I don't really know what to do. Jordan Mason's gone. Maybe Elijah Mitchell's still out there and I can just slot him in and hope for some help there. Just going straight down the line here. I'm not even going in order of standings anymore. We have Tim versus Ashley, and we already seen some trash talk going on this morning between the two here. Once again, not a lot of buys. I think all the buys are just concentrated on like two teams this week. I think it's Cameron and John a little bit that are just getting fucked left and right. Ashley is taking a little bit of a hit. Dak Prescott and Adam Thielen. Dak Prescott QB1 last week. Who'd have thunk it? Ooh, some water. I'm going crazy. Yeah, Dak Prescott against the Chargers on Monday night. QB1, 272 yards. Added a rushing touchdown and 40 rushing yards. She will be missing him this week, but she gets a slot in Brock Purdy, who I just talked about during the waivers. Against a bad Vikings secondary, and if you're missing Christian McCaffrey and you're playing a bad secondary, I think he should put up some numbers. Had 4 touchdowns a couple weeks ago against Dallas, and until last week has put up at least 20 points in 3 of his last 4. Played the best defense in the league last week, and struggled a little bit there. Josh Allen also struggled pretty hard last week. Before that, he was on a 23, 21, 36, 27 run. Last week only had 13, 2 touchdowns, a pick, and only 169 yards, and probably the worst game I've ever seen from the Josh Allen-led Bills against the worst team in the league, Giants. This week he gets New England, and what I think should be a bounce back. They are at New England, and New England still has a decent defense. But the one thing I will say about Josh Allen here is you could see game script come into it a little bit. New England's offense is just piss poor. So I think we could see some early, first quarter touchdowns, first quarter explosiveness. And I think we're going to get a little bit of a James Cook, Latavius Murray show. Tim also has been a little bit fucked on running back. Obviously, James Conner going to IR hurts. Tajay Spears and Breece Hall being on bye hurts a lot. So now he is starting Javonte Williams, who is also coming back off of an injury. So we'll see if he is 100% ready to go, or maybe if he's on a snap count or a little bit limited. Last week against Kansas City, 52 yards, had 7.2 points. Doesn't even work. Did he have a reception? Oh, 2-point conversion. Okay. So we'll see if he's back and ready to go. He does get a pretty solid Packers defense. Holy shit, they're 29th against the run. I thought the Packers defense was good, dude. What the fuck? Tyreek Hill is always scary. Amon-Ra is always scary. So they're going to get theirs. Tyreek Hill does get a pretty solid Eagles defense as far as pass rush goes, and we've seen the pass rush be able to affect the Dolphins a little bit. The secondary is still really banged up for the Eagles. In fact, I went ahead and benched their defense this week because I do think that secondary could get torched a little bit if Tua has time to throw the ball, and that's going to be the big question mark is can Tua get the ball out in time? Typically he's pretty good in release points, but the Eagles do tend to get a lot of pressure with that front 7 or with their front 4 in general. Amon-Ra playing the Ravens in an actually pretty solid secondary. But if there's anybody I'd trust in any game to get, at least 10 to 15 points, it's Amon-Ra. Last week against the Bucs, went 24 and a touchdown, 24.4 points. We do get the Jalen Waddle Tyreek Hill matchup. Everybody remembers when Trevor and Ashley played each other last year with the Tyreek Hill Jalen Waddle matchup, and that was the game that Tua threw for like 450 yards, and they both had 40. Really fun there, but that'll be a very interesting Sunday night matchup to go into. And then Saquon Barkley, what did he do last week? Against the Bills defense, 93 yards, and pulled in a reception. He's still recovering from, I believe, what was it, an ankle? Gets to a decent Washington defense this week, but he's the only functional part of that Giants offense. And that Giants offense really can't function. So we'll see what he is able to do. I usually don't talk tight ends. I am very interested to see if Ashley makes the change back to Kyle Pitts. Coming off back-to-back top fantasy performances, he's tight end 12 on the year. 87 yards against Houston a couple weeks ago, 43 yards and a touchdown last week. So they are getting him the ball. He had 6 targets. We'll see if she makes that switch off of Cole Kmet and switches back to Kyle Pitts. and something interesting to keep an eye on. And Christian Watson on the bench. We'll see if he sneaks his way into the lineup over. Ooh, maybe not over Chris Godwin, maybe. But he gets a bad Broncos defense. So if he's going to have a breakout game, it's usually a good bet that it's going to be against the Broncos. As far as a winner here, I'm going to stick with Tim. Tim's been on fire as far as just putting up points. Obviously, he's had some bad luck. And we've seen Ashley have the capability of putting up 120, 130 on any given week. So I do think this tends to be a closer matchup than maybe the record suggests. 2-4 versus 3-3, 6 versus 8. But keep an eye on this one actually being a little bit of a high scoring matchup. I do think that the Dolphins have some success against the Eagles. Obviously, there's a little bit of counter out effect with the Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. But I do think Tim ends up pulling out the victory this week. Once again, just a little more consistency from his side. But Ashley having the ability to just put up points whenever she needs to. And jumping on over to Andrew versus Charlie. Charlie, yeah, man. Tyler Boyd on a bye. DeAndre Hopkins on a bye. Justin Fields is not going to play. He did pick up Geno Smith against the Cardinals, which I do really like that matchup. On the other side, you have Andrew with Tony Pollard and Joe Burrow on bye weeks. So both the quarterbacks, both the starting quarterbacks going to be missing. We'll have Jordan Love versus Geno Smith, it appears. Both playing bad defenses. Geno Smith getting the Cardinals, Jordan Love getting the Broncos. Oh. Excuse me. Sorry, that coffee's coming back up on me. But as far as two streaming quarterbacks, I do like the matchups here, Cardinals and the Broncos. Charlie also pulling Kenneth Walker and Rachaad White. We saw last week. Didn't help him out a ton. He got 16 from Kenneth Walker. Rachaad White being the wink link here, only 5.3 points. And he gets a very tough Atlanta run defense this week. I don't really foresee him doing much more than he did unless he can sneak a touchdown in. Talked about Rashawn Johnson. Still hasn't practiced since he had the concussion. So it'll be very interesting to see if he can go. If he can go, he'll be RB1 for the Bears. And something I need to keep an eye on as well. To see if I can go ahead and slot in Deontay Foreman, assuming either Aaron Jones or Christian McCaffrey can't go. Or both, which would suck a lot. DJ Moore and the Bears as a whole getting the Raiders this week. A defense you can run on, a defense you can throw on. Came back down to earth last week, only 51 yards against a pretty bad Vikings secondary. And obviously, he will be missing his QB1 this week in Justin Fields. Whew. All right, got a little cough in me. And I honestly don't know what Charlie's starting lineup is going to look like at kickoff. I assume George Pickens is going in for Tyler Boyd. And then what do you do? Josh Palmer in for DeAndre Hopkins. Don't love it, but it's kind of all you got unless you can find somebody else on the waivers, which they're not there. Maybe Mecole Hardman comes in and has a big week. Charlie's having a bit of a rough go of it this season, and it's only getting worse. So, sorry, bud. Andrew, I think, takes the win this week. The only thing we really have to keep an eye on here is this RB2 slot with Rashawn Johnson, because he does not have a viable backup on his bench currently, with Tony Pollard being on a bye. So another thing to keep an eye on there. But I still think he finds a way to get it done. Travis Kelce loves dominating the Chargers. So we'll see if he can get back to a multi-touchdown game. He's yet to have a multi-touchdown game this season, and usually we see that all the week from Travis Kelce. But I'm still going to go with Andrew winning this one. And the last game, we have Charlie versus Trevor. Not Charlie. Cameron versus Trevor. Jesus Christ. Cameron being the taking the biggest hit of a bye week this week. He has Joe Mixon, Chuba Hubbard, Evan McPherson, Hayden Hurst, Alan Lazard, and Miles Sanders all on buys this week. Still has Achane on the IR, still has Jefferson on the IR. So the good news here is you get Patrick Mahomes against the Chargers, which, like I said, is usually a pretty high-flying, high-scoring game that the Chiefs usually pull out in some dramatic fashion, with Patrick Mahomes throwing a touchdown to Travis Kelce in the last couple minutes. So I do like your floor here with Patrick Mahomes against the Chiefs, and I do like Tua against the Eagles. I talked about the pass rush, but I think Tua finds a way to get the ball out early. I think McDaniels runs a great game script. Not necessarily if the Dolphins win that game. I think it's going to be an incredible game on Sunday night. But I do think Tua kind of stays in form even against a better Eagles defense, and gets to attack that secondary pretty heavily. Last week, 262 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's pretty much all he does is throw for 200 yards and multiple touchdowns. The running backs here, I think, is where Trevor is really going to separate himself, and the wide receiver. Trevor actually should dominate this game, which, as we've seen this season, probably means he loses by 30. I legitimately don't know who Cameron is going to start at running back. Mixon, Hubbard, Sanders, all on buys. Doesn't have an active running back on roster right now, which means he's stuck right now with just Isaiah Pacheco. So, and his wide receivers, Josh Reynolds, which, could be replaced with Romeo Doubs or Jahan Dotson. Drake London has had a decent couple of weeks here, 11 and 17 points in the last 2 weeks. So he's definitely going to get the start. But on the other side, when you've got Tua against the Eagles, Josh Jacobs against the Bears should have just a monster day. ETN has been popping off. He does get a little bit better defensive challenge this week in the Saints. But he's had 2 touchdowns in each of his last 2 games, so he's been going crazy while Trevor Lawrence has been struggling. So we'll see if he can continue that tonight, and I think there's a chance that Trevor Lawrence doesn't play tonight, which means we could get another version of the ETN show. Keenan Allen has just been a godsend for Trevor and the Chargers, especially with Mike Williams out. Last week, 85 yards and a touchdown, and I've talked about the Chiefs matchup, the Chargers matchup this week. DK Metcalf gets the Cardinals in what could be a get-right game for him. He was a little banged up last week. He still isn't practicing, it looks like. But as long as he can go, the Cardinals are very exposable. And I think with Geno Smith having a monster day, DK Metcalf is the main beneficiary of that. But if he can't go, kind of going all the way back to Raleigh's matchup, look for Tyler Lockett to have a pretty monster day. I do think the Seahawks do a little bit more of what we saw from the Seahawks of last year. Just points and yards left and right. And then Brian Robinson against the Giants. I like him to have another big day. He had the 2 touchdown game in week 2 where he put up 28 points. I don't quite expect that kind of production. But 80 yards and a touchdown and a couple receptions, getting him to that 13, 14 point mark, I think is very reasonable to expect. I'm going to predict Trevor here. I know he's found a way to lose every game, but Cameron just got fucked hard by injuries and buys. I really don't even, like I said, I don't know that he's going to start a viable legal lineup. Getting a running back in there, I mean, your options in the waivers at this point are like Jerick McKinnon. So I think it's going to be a little bit too much for Cameron to overcome. And I think Trevor gets the win this week. So that's it. A little bit of a groggy recap. Not as much energy as usual. But once again, I grind. I get in here and I do it for you guys. Happy Blink-182 album release day, 11 p.m. Set your calendars, set your alarms. Make sure you're there for that. And have a good week. Good luck, everyone.